while we're taking down sacred cows, tell us a little bit about your research into Lincoln and the Civil War.
Yeah, I don't know how I stumbled across this, but I ended up, the Civil War became the longest chapter of the book. And I had this theory that, I went into the Civil War with this theory of everything being about tax. You can explain every event. Once you look at the world, at history, at the world today, at the future, through this prism of taxation, suddenly it gives you an explanation for everything. Because tax is control, tax is power, tax is everywhere. And so I went into the American Civil War. I was just basically retelling the story of civilization through this new perspective. And the way I've always been brought up about the American Civil War, it was the story I was told was that the southern states wanted to keep slavery and the northern states didn't want the southern states to have slavery, and so they went to war. Now, that story never quite made sense to me, because in that case, why did they then have segregation? And I don't believe that many people in those days, in the context of the morals of that time, would have given their lives to fight for a cause like that. And then I discovered that in 1864, I think it was, the southern states sent a delegation to Britain saying that if you recognize the Confederacy as a separate nation, we will no longer impose slavery. And I thought, wait a minute. And then I sort of thought, one of the reasons that it was the British that got rid of slavery first. And at the time, we were the richest nation in the world. And the reason we were able to get rid of slavery, I mean, human beings slavery had existed, it wasn't just the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery had existed across the world throughout history. And man has enslaved his brother. But the reason that the English were able to get rid of it was that machines were so much more productive than people, that machines made us more productive, they made us richer, and they enabled us to afford to take a morally superior position. So in other words, the richer you get, the more productive you get, almost the better morals you have. I'm not saying that richer people are better than poor people. I'm saying that the wealthier a society is, the higher standards of morality it is able to achieve. Mm-hmm. And so the British had long, I think 1830s, was it, that they abandoned slavery? Anyway, and then I just started reading a few documents, and I discovered that there was this ongoing row between the southern states and the northern states, because at the turn of the 19th century, in 1812, America had another war with Britain, the War of 1812, and it went on for 3 years. And it was widely agreed by the United States that they were woefully prepared for that war, because they'd been too dependent on British industrial goods. And if they were to have another war and defend themselves against the British, they would need to be able to produce their own weapons and other industrial goods with which to fight the war. And all the states were united in this. And so a tariff was imposed, and the southern states were the richest states in America at this point, with the cotton farms, and they paid the majority of these taxes. And I think it was at one point something like 90% of federal revenue came from the southern states. And that revenue was used to build industry in the north and foster growth and so on, so that America would no longer be dependent on British industrial goods, which is a fairly sensible strategy. But then by the 1820s, the southern states were like, okay, we've done it, we've built industry anymore, we don't need this protectionism anymore. And the northern states were like, no, we want to carry on with these subsidies. And this just became an ongoing dispute in the states for some 30 or 40 years, where the southern states felt like they were subsidizing northern industry. and they felt like they were losing out. And it got more and more intense, and particularly when the cotton markets were weak, when the cotton price was low, they got more and more angry about it. And Lincoln was known to be very much in favor of protectionism. And the southern states had tried to secede a couple of times before. And eventually when Lincoln was elected, and he actually said, "It is not my intention to make slavery illegal." He said that. But the southern states still wanted to succeed. And the reason is they were sick of subsidizing. Of course, they wanted to protect the institution of slavery because it was essential to their business model. But more important was their independence. And as is revealed by the fact that they sent this delegation to Britain saying, "We'll get rid of slavery as long as you recognize our independence." Their independence was more important. And Lincoln, on the other hand, knew that Southern tax revenue was essential to the survival of the Union. It was dependent on it. And so he went to war to protect Union tax revenue. And it's all very well saying, yeah, but the Southern states fired the first shot at Sumter, but that was a deliberate ploy to provoke them into doing that. And so suddenly, when you look at things through this perspective of taxation, that Civil War, the reasons for everything going on was much more, takes a whole different perspective. And basically, everyone was fighting over their economic interests. That's the sort of summary of it. And, the Emancipation Act only came about halfway through the war. And the purpose of the Emancipation Act, again, was not because Lincoln was some great hero champion of black people. He was trying to sow discord in the southern states because at that point the southern states were winning the war. The southern states could never defeat the north. The north had twice as many people. It just didn't have a chance. The army was twice as big, but it made a good job of defending itself. And so he was trying to make the southern forces have to deal with slave uprisings. He's trying to create internal strife so that they couldn't defend their borders, if that makes sense. And so that was sort of the tactic of the Emancipation Act. And once you sort of look at it through that, the war takes on a very different perspective. Now, I'm aware that Americans don't like being told about their history by a bloke with an English accent. So I hope you'll forgive me for that long lecture. But again, there's plenty has been written about it before, but I don't think anyone's done it quite as concisely as I've done it in this book. And it will... it will give you a very new perspective on that particular period in history. And there was two other things that resulted from that war. One is Lincoln invented the IRS. He gave America the IRS. It didn't previously exist. And secondly, this law that if an American, even if he leaves America and lives in Japan or Africa or wherever he lives, he still has to pay taxes to the United States, or he has to renounce his citizenship. Again, that was a Lincoln thing that he introduced in that war in order to protect Union revenue. The other thing Lincoln did is he gave Americans their first income tax. It only lasted for about 10 or 15 years, but it was again to raise funds to pay for that war.
Sometimes in order to take an honest look at our history, we need to hear it from someone else outside who hasn't been indoctrinated into the particular myths of Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and Abraham Lincoln.